This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome everyone to another episode of Atomic Biscuits. This is 2025-0504, Disinfecting Sunlight. Let's start out over here at ZeroHedge.com. CIA can neither confirm nor deny whether secret Virginia site is theirs, by Tyler Durden. A low-profile government complex in Northern Virginia, long rumored to be a CIA spook site, briefly appeared on a federal real estate for sale list last month, only to disappear from the market within hours in a mysterious vanishing act worthy of a spy novel. The nondescript Par Franconia warehouse complex, tucked just off I-95 a few miles from the Pentagon, popped up on a Trump administration list of non-core federal properties slated for potential sale, Bloomberg reports, noting that the list was yanked down less than 24 hours later, including more than 400 other buildings and offices, some housing cabinet-level agencies. But it was the Springfield cluster that raised eyebrows. 14 buildings, some going by names like Franconia Building B and Butler Building 12, which don't appear on any other public database of government real estate. The CIA can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of records related to the proposed sale, the agency said Monday in a response to a Freedom of Information Act request filed by Bloomberg News, deploying its classic Glomar language coined during a Cold War submarine recovery op in 1974. The site, which dates to 1952, has been the subject of decades of local speculation. Foreign policy once identified it as a heavily guarded compound used to store classified files, equipment, and supplies. Mark Ambinder of The Week called it perhaps the worst-kept secret in Springfield, where neighbors talk openly about the strange security measures and rotating surveillance. It's been identified in numerous public forums. The bad guys know it exists. The CIA and the Air Force often assign counter-surveillance teams to the area, wrote Armbinder. Even Fairfax County assigns a hefty valuation. The 1.2 million square foot property is tax-exempt, but carries an appraisal of over $115 million. The Trump administration has made waves with its effort to trim the government's bloated real estate portfolio, but this listing, along with the headquarters of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which Secretary Scott Turner famously slammed as the ugliest building in D.C., may have gone a step too far. In the end, the administration backtracked on all 443 proposed sales, citing a need for further review, but the sudden appearance of a shadowy Springfield site, potentially connected to U.S. intelligence, suggests someone in the bureaucracy might have hit the publish without reading the fine print or the classification stamps. Neither the CIA nor the General Services Administration will say more, not even to confirm the property exists, which in the world of cloak and dagger real estate probably says everything. Again, that's over at ZeroHedge.com. Now, one of the things that got my attention about this is I noticed a strange pattern emerging in general search across news items this week, which will lead me to my final story this week. The word Virginia shows up in all kinds of stories, and it's almost like what I would call keyword hijacking went into effect. How to bury in plain sight what should be the lead. You cover it up with other juicy tidbits that someone who is searching for it might otherwise go, "Ooh, what's this?" instead of clicking through to the other details. I don't think there's much that we can cover about Virginia Giuffre that hasn't been said already, but we'll do a recap at the end of the show, so stay tuned. Over at technology-centric TheRegister.com was this story. RSA co-founder, "The world would have been better without cryptocurrencies." This is by Ian Thompson. It was a somewhat gloomy cryptographers panel at the RSA conference in San Francisco on Tuesday, with two of the industry's sages in a pretty grim mood. Adir Shamir, the S in the RSA algorithm and a co-founder of RSA Security, went off on cryptocurrency, saying its early promise has been wasted. While he said Satoshi Nakamoto's paper on Bitcoin and its blockchain was very lofty, its promise of becoming a decentralized way to exchange money digitally without government interference or reliance on financial institutions hasn't come through, in Shamir's opinion. Everything is highly centralized in a small number of very large exchanges. No one is using it in order to make payments. People are using it once in order to speculate, he opined while on the panel. So my personal opinion is that the world would have been better without cryptocurrencies. He continued, cryptocurrencies are what enabled all the malware. It would have been very difficult to extract so much money from companies if there were no cryptocurrencies. Ed Felton, professor emeritus of computer science at Princeton University, was less pessimistic. He told the conference audience that yes, things aren't as easy as Nakamoto may have envisioned, and a shift to a decentralized currency is massively complicated, but it's very early days, and major societal institutions are still working out the ground rules. Governments are increasingly understanding the potential and pitfalls of such a shift, he suggested, and the fact that the biggest finance houses are now getting behind the technology with products including stablecoins is a very positive sign. It would be foolish to sit here and try to defend every cryptocurrency in the world or everybody who's in that space, but in a lot of ways it reminds me of the early internet, Felton posited. There are a lot of people doing silly things, some people doing dangerous and criminal things, but there's a lot of people building interesting things, a surprising number of people, especially in parts of the world where the local governments issue currency is not very safe. Shamir agreed that the basic blockchain technology is sound, but its implementation in cryptocurrency isn't. Having anonymous currencies that can move around the world without hindrance or responsibility isn't ideal, he said. Bitcoin, for what it's worth, isn't actually anonymous. As for cryptocurrency itself, Whitfield Diffie, a pioneer in public-private key security and co-inventor of the crucial Diffie-Hellman key exchange technique, was in a similarly downbeat mood. The guru said he's worried the NSA and others are storing old encrypted messages that they can't read right now, but will be able to in the future once computing power and improved techniques make the data possible to decode. It's what the intelligence community would call collect now, exploit later, is the heart of intelligence, he intoned. There are vast tape libraries at NSA and all the rest of those organizations running back years. Quantum-resistant cryptography, which has been in the works for years and is gradually being deployed now, may head off attempts by the NSA et al. To crack today and tomorrow's harvested encrypted communications in the future using quantum computers. But we may not know how well that resistance works until a practical quantum computer is up and running, and stuff encrypted in the past without quantum resistance eventually may or will be busted open. Diffie acknowledged there are folks developing this so-called hybrid post-quantum cryptography. He likened the situation to trying to write a crypto system in World War II that would stand up to today's computer-equipped code breakers. Shamir agreed, saying not moving to hybrid earlier was a major mistake. He predicted that the first proper quantum computers should be out by 2040, but said it was a very risky bet. As for the traditional battle between governments and citizens over encryption and backdooring, Diffie was scathing about the UK's latest attempts to potentially eavesdrop on Apple users. He argued this effort was largely fruitless because if anyone, innocent or otherwise, wanted to shield their chatter or data from the British authorities, they have plenty of secure options to choose from besides Apple's iCloud. Then there's the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth's use of Signal for federal work. Diffie deplored its use in government to get around public sector records-keeping laws and feared it could be subverted to quietly disclose end-to-end encrypted conversations. What bothers me is that Signal makes you have updates every few days or something and insists you use the latest version, and that means someone with a court order could say, "Here, slip a bug into a version, ship it out, and make everybody use it," he warned. Signal is adamant its software is secure and will pull out of countries that attempt to force it to implement a hidden backdoor. Again, that's over at theregister.com. Over at Breitbart.com, they had this article, Jihadi-ruled Syria seeks strategic partnership with China. Now, I wonder if they have conferred with the Uyghurs about what China does to Muslims. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani said on Monday that the junta in Damascus wants to strengthen relations with China and develop a strategic partnership. To that end, Shabani met with Chinese ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Kong, at UN headquarters in New York on Monday. The Syrian foreign minister said the two nations agreed to work together on their partnership, although no details of their plans were made public. Syria appreciates China's stance in support of Syria's rights and in resolving the Syrian crisis through political dialogue and international cooperation, Shabani said after the meeting. China, like its fellow authoritarian regimes in Russia and Iran, was a military and economic supporter of dictator Bashar Assad during the brutal decade-long civil war he fought to remain in power. Russia and Iran sent in troops to keep Assad in power, while China ran cover for him at the United Nations, using its United Nations Security Council veto to block 8 resolutions pertaining to the Syrian civil war. China has used its veto power a grand total of 19 times since 1955, and 8 of those vetoes were employed on Assad's behalf. With Russia and Iran distracted by their wars in Ukraine and Gaza, a coalition of Islamist insurgents headed by an al-Qaeda offshoot called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, managed to topple Assad with a swift march on Damascus in December of 2024. HTS established what is supposed to be an interim government presided over by its leader, former al-Qaeda and Islamic State member Ahmed al-Sharaa. Shabani has served as the new government's foreign minister since the day after Assad was overthrown. Before that, he was director of political affairs for the Salvation Government, the shadow government established by rebel groups in Syria's Idlib province in 2017. The Salvation Government was the first major effort by HTS to establish itself as a legitimate political party with significant administrative skills rather than just an al-Qaeda splinter group and a jihadi insurgent militia. Reviews of the Salvation Government's success were decidedly mixed, but HTS now finds itself controlling almost all of Syria, and one of its highest priorities is gaining international recognition so the sanctions leveled against the Assad regime might be lifted. The people of China and Syria enjoy a traditional friendship, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun said on Tuesday when asked about Shabani's meeting with Ambassador Fu in New York. China supports Syria in realizing peace at an early date and finding a nation reconstruction plan that meets its people's aspirations through inclusive dialogue, Guo said. We hope that Syria would firmly oppose all forms of terrorist and extremist forces, he added. China's interest in Assad may have been born from Beijing's general sense of unease during the Arab Spring revolutions of the early 2010s. The Chinese were worried about Arab Spring unrest spreading to their own Muslim minorities, especially the Uyghur Muslims, some who journeyed to Syria to join the rebellion against Assad. China was not comfortable with the notion that some of those militants might return home with battlefield experience and weapons. The Assad regime joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, in 2022. Assad, believing he had decisively won the Syrian civil war, was eager for Chinese assistance with post-war reconstruction, while China wanted a prime cut of the lucrative Syrian reconstruction business. During his remaining 2 years in power, Assad often pointed to his membership in BRI as China's seal of approval for the legitimacy of his government. He also anticipated using BRI to evade Western sanctions, and China was eager to help him, envisioning Syria as the first great triumph for a new world order in which China eliminated sanctions as an effective tool for imposing Western humanitarian ideals. The pragmatic Chinese are unlikely to see a reason not to shrug off the defeat of Assad and rebuild a profitable relationship with the rebels who ousted him, while HTS clearly wants money and international support, and it will have a much easier time forgiving China's economic support for Assad than Russia's military assistance to the late regime. The Hindu recently pointed out one bit of unfinished business might complicate the new relationship between Beijing and Damascus. Some of those Uyghurs who joined the rebellion against Assad are still in Syria, and they hold important positions in the new Syrian army. There could be up to 2,000 Uyghur officers in the Syrian army, and at least one of them is a high-ranking commander. The contrast with China's relationship with the Taliban in Afghanistan is instructive. The Taliban was willing to pull Uyghur militants back from Afghanistan's small Chinese border region to satisfy Beijing's security concerns, but the Hindu was skeptical that Shah will be quite so willing to turn against his longtime Uyghur allies. That story is over at Breitbart.com. I almost didn't cover this particular story because it's like beating a dead horse. It's clown-right stupid, I would say. Over at Blaze Media, theblaze.com, Chuck Todd rages against stupid accusation that media covered up Biden's mental decline. They didn't miss this story. Now, I think the reason that this story persists is it takes up space on the left's vacuous media bandwagons. It gives them something to argue about that really doesn't progress anybody's knowledge about anything that's going on. Todd angrily yelled at Chris Cillizza over the accusations. Chuck Todd went on a rant about the stupid accusation against the media, of which he was a part, that they covered up the mental decline of former President Joe Biden and blamed Democrats instead. The former NBC News host was speaking with journalist Chris Cillizza when he suddenly and angrily railed against critics who accused the media of colluding with Democrats to deceive the American public about Biden's deterioration at the end of his term. This is not a media failure, Todd said. This was a failure of the Democratic Party, and the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. Todd cited one journalist's critique of the party for choosing Biden and continued on his rant. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for, and there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden. And they're not journalists. They're former strategists that carried water for Joe Biden, he yelled. Zero introspection here. He went on to say that the incident did not compare to the media debacle that led to the invasion of Iraq under the Bush presidency, which he did admit was a media failure. That was a press failure, massive press failure. This was not that failure, he yelled. This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other, Todd concluded, when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress. And of course, they included a link to this video so you could chew on it. Democrats have enthusiastically formed a circular firing squad to blame each other for the devastating results of the election and to seize control of the direction of their flailing party. Again, that's over at theblaze.com. RedState.com had this article, "For Agency Leakers, the Polygraph Man Cometh." This is posted by Chase Jennings. Be afraid, be very afraid. The Trump administration has had enough with the leaking of important information by those within the federal bureaucracy. The days of leaking documents to the press without any repercussions are coming to an end. The FBI and other agencies are working to get to the bottom of who is leaking important information and internal conversations with a polygraph test for suspected federal employees. News outlet Reuters is reporting that FBI Director Kash Patel is fed up with the leaks and is working to track down those responsible. I understand Director Patel's frustration. While at DHS, we would send around important information outlining future plans to secure the border. 5 minutes after the email was sent, I'd get a call from the New York Times or Washington Post asking for a comment. Leaking is a complete misuse of trust and causes division within the agency. The hardest part? It's coming from career bureaucrats that we couldn't fire, although this is changing under Trump. Here is what happens. Reporters will connect with career department employees over LinkedIn and work to build a relationship. Once a relationship is established, the leaking of important documents can begin. Thanks to the Office of Management and Budget's Schedule F, which will make it easier to fire rogue bureaucrats, this will change quickly. In the article, Reuters states, the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, said on Monday it has started using polygraph tests to aid investigations aimed at identifying the source of leaks emanating from within the law enforcement agency. We can confirm the FBI has begun administering polygraph tests to identify the source of information leaks within the Bureau, the Bureau's Public Affairs Office told Reuters in a statement. Republican President Donald Trump's administration has been cracking down on people who leak information to journalists since he returned to office in January. Well, good. These career bureaucrats pretend to work for the president in an unbiased manner, but history shows us that is not the case. President Trump and his administration deal with far more leaks than other administrations. Why would that be? Because these bureaucrats work internally against the president and his agenda. I'll also mention that many of these employees make well over $100,000 with great benefits and up to 20% yearly bonuses. That's right. They make way more than the average American and are regularly working to subvert the agenda the country voted for. Now the agencies are taking a major step to track down these leakers. We should all celebrate this move. Thankfully, the FBI is not alone. Reports have circulated that both Defense Secretary Hegseth and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard are looking at polygraph tests for suspected department leakers. This would be a cleanup of nearly all our intelligence agencies. I understand the argument regarding the intelligence community and their ability to skirt a lie detector in many such cases. I'm sure that's a valid argument. The point I'm trying to make is simple. It's the effort here that counts in a lot of ways. During Trump 1.0, we did not have the personnel nor the willpower to go after these rogue bureaucrats. Agency leaders allowed the media narrative to scare them away from any true accountability. Trump 2.0 is unafraid in changing that narrative. For President Trump's agenda to be successful, this is the type of effort it will take. Whether it's polygraph tests for leakers, judges being arrested for breaking the law, executive orders going after corporate law firms, the time is now. I applaud FBI Director Patel and others who have had enough with the career bureaucrats working against the president. It could very well change the trajectory of our country. Again, that is Chase Jennings over at redstate.com. Here in the States, we have hack governors of some states telling their constituents and announcing for the world to hear that they should resist Trump by getting out on the streets and creating havoc and chaos. Well, that's exactly what they're doing, and I'm sure that they're getting paid to do it. This story over at redstate.com illustrates that hammer of justice is about to fall on two left-wing busybodies who tried to stop ICE arrests in Virginia. Fair warning to anyone who thinks they will stop Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE agents, from taking illegals, particularly those with rap sheets, into custody. Interfere and you'll be prosecuted. ICE is not playing around here. The latest story of leftist busybodies interfering with the long arm of the law comes from Charlottesville, Virginia, home to the University of Virginia and more than its fair share of lefty activists. Last Tuesday, ICE agents arrived at the Albemarle County Courthouse to take into custody two illegals, one from Mexico and the other from Honduras, who were leaving court after being charged with various misdemeanor crimes. Two extremely annoying busybodies, masked up, of course, and sporting the latest in campus rage chic, stepped in, repeatedly putting themselves in between the perps and the ICE officers, clearly in an effort to prevent the officers from doing their job, put a pin in the topic of activists wearing masks. We'll get back to that in a minute. Here are the busybodies in all their glory, and there's a post link here to the video on X. As is abundantly clear from that video, the women purposefully put their bodies between the perps and the ICE agents, despite repeated warnings from one of the officers to not touch him or impede in the arrests of the two illegals. The duo were also warned that their interference was a crime, but they continued to meddle in the arrests and demanded to know if the agents had a warrant for the arrests. Now let me think for just a moment. Where did I hear someone strategizing out loud about demanding warrant information and knowing one's rights? And that means citizens should know their rights too. Who was that woman? Could it have been the fake crier from the border? Yep. Could it be the waitress posing as a... Yeah, that's the one. Albemarle County Sheriff Chan Bryant, whose agency oversees security at the courthouse, confirmed that the ICE agents involved did show their badges and the appropriate paperwork to the bailiffs on site. The agents, of course, were under no obligation to provide that information to the meddlers. ICE is now saying that they will be pursuing criminal charges against the two interfering activists and are pushing back at the efforts of Albemarle County Commonwealth Attorney Jim Hingley to investigate what he calls the courthouse raid. "It is shameful," wrote an ICE spokesman who declined to be named in a Saturday morning statement, "that the Commonwealth Attorney, a sworn officer of the court and a fellow law enforcement officer, has decided to prioritize politics over public safety, placing a criminal's well-being above that of brave women and men in law enforcement whom the Commonwealth Attorney took an oath to support." Surprise, surprise, Jim Hingley is funded by George Soros. Hingley is apparently also a Chris Van Hollen clone, bragging that he's confident that his constituents appreciate his efforts to thwart ICE from taking illegals into custody. Let's take a look at the Jim Hingley constituents in question here. Pablo Aparicio Marcelino, a Mexican national who's been charged more than once with DUI. Teodoro Dominguez Rodriguez, a Honduran citizen charged with leaving the scene of a traffic accident. In short, Commonwealth's Attorney Hingley places the politics of illegal immigration over the safety of his actual constituents. Despite attempts by local media to frame this as two bystanders who were just asking questions of the ICE officials, this seems to be the work of a group called UVA Dissenters. Social media accounts connected to the group apparently posted photos of the agents involved in the arrests and descriptions of their vehicles, down to the license plate numbers. On the subject of masks, it's mostly illegal to wear them when involved in political protests. Virginia code holds that it's unlawful for anyone over the age of 16 to wear a mask with the intent of concealing his or her identity. There are certain exceptions, but hiding your identity when involved in political protests is not one of them. Pablo Aparicio Marcelino and Teodoro Dominguez Rodriguez are currently being held at the Farmville Detention Center pending repatriation back to their respective homelands. Thanks to President Trump, illegal immigration in our country has virtually stopped. Despite the radical left's lies, new legislation wasn't needed to secure our border, just the new president. Again, that is over at redstate.com. Well, just when you thought you couldn't get that ugly mug out of your mind, she's back, but in this form, maybe permanently. OANN, that's One American News, has this article. GOP Senator reintroduces Pelosi Act, which would ban Congress from trading stocks. It's time. This is by Blake Wolf. GOP Senator Josh Hawley recently introduced a bill proposing a ban on members of Congress from engaging in trading and owning stocks, naming it the Pelosi Act. Hawley, who's a Republican from Missouri, his legislation, whose acronym stands for Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act, Pelosi, previously failed to pass under the Biden administration. Members of Congress should be fighting for the people they were elected to serve, not day trading at the expense of their constituents, Hawley stated. Americans have seen politician after politician turn a profit using information not available to the general public. It's time we ban all members of Congress from trading and holding stocks and restore Americans' trust in our nation's legislative body. If passed, the bill would provide a 6-month grace period for congressional figures who would face financial penalties, including surrendering profits after the legislation goes into effect. The bill also requires an audit by the Government Accountability Office within 2 years after it takes effect and submits the findings to congressional ethics committees for review. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump seemingly endorsed the bill, stating that he absolutely would sign off on legislation barring Congress from stock trading on Friday. Well, I watched Nancy Pelosi get rich through insider information, and I would be okay with it. If they send that to me, I would do it, President Trump stated. Pelosi reportedly has a net worth of roughly $200 million, despite having an annual salary of $223,000, according to PolitiFact. Much of Pelosi's wealth has been generated from stock trading, so much so that amateur traders are now mirroring her and her husband's every move. Stay informed. Receive breaking blasts to your inbox for free over at OANN.com. One American News. It's been a while since I've heard from Selena Zito over at the New York Post, but here she is. China's aggressive export strategy has shattered the U.S. glass industry. For 132 years, the sound of the factory air whistle signaling the start of the workday at the plant along 8th and McKean Avenue in this Washington County borough meant all the things we associate with work. Men and women had jobs, families had food on their table, the societal fabric was strong, churches were full, and the tax base kept the schools vibrant and the community prosperous. It was a good sound. It meant stability and aspiration. No one around here ever seemed to mind it. Last week, the sound of that whistle was different. It was longer. 132 seconds to be exact, a number meant to mark how many years the Pyrex glass plant had stood at this location. It marked the end of the line for the plant. The sound was mournful as it echoed through the Mon Valley. 300 men and women are now without jobs in a town of 4,200. Last September, the company, now known as Corel Brands, announced it would close the plant that had been one of the great innovators at its inception when two Pittsburgh glass-making firms, the Thomas Evans and Company and the George Macbeth Company, merged to form Macbeth Evans Glass Company in 1899. 1 year later, the local newspaper boasted about the expansion of manufacturing in western Pennsylvania. Along a 16-mile strip, factories employed more than 8,000 people who made good wages at the turn of the century in what was once sleepy farmland. Hundreds of houses of all kinds were being built almost overnight on rolling hills that overlooked the plants, employing real estate developers and construction workers and causing a boom in mom-and-pop grocery stores, gas stations, barbershops, schools, and churches. By 1936, Macbeth Evans was bought out by Corning Glass Works, then the largest maker of technical glassware. At the time of the merger, the plant employed 1,800 people. The news was so big it made the front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette above the fold on November 11, 1936. Today, all of those mills are long gone. Pittsburgh Plate Glass, which became known as PPG, a place that employed my father for 50 years, where he designed the furnaces that made glass, no longer makes glass. They sold that division to Nippon Electric Glass in 2017, marking the end of PPG's long history in glass production, which began in 1883. Meanwhile, Anchor Hocking Glassware took over the Charleroi plant in March of 2024 and announced they would close it and move operations to their plant in Lancaster, Ohio. It, too, was a company founded at the turn of the century by Isaac Jacob in Lancaster. Anchor Hocking has gone through a series of acquisitions, venture capital ownerships, and bankruptcies. Today, it's owned by Monomoy Capital Partners, a private equity firm located in Midtown Manhattan. We've talked a lot about tariffs and manufacturing since President Trump was reelected in 2024 and the outsized role of China in our industries, and the Corning Glass Works Macbeth Evans division is certainly such an example. In fact, our uneven trade has played a significant role in the glass manufacturing collapse in this country. Up into the 1990s, the United States held its own in glass manufacturing. However, China's aggressive export strategy, which flooded the U.S. market with thousands of goods, hit the glass industry hard. In June last year, the Alliance for American Manufacturing released an analysis detailing the threat Chinese imports posed to U.S. manufacturers. In a briefing by the Economic Policy Institute, the glass industry appeared well aware of the dangers of Chinese imports. They noted that the U.S. glass industry lost almost 40,000 manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2008. At the same time, China's share of the U.S. market rose from 3% to 31%. As U.S. glass and glassware plants closed, Chinese manufacturers expanded. China now leads glass production globally, exporting 28.7% of the world's glass and glassware compared to the United States' just 6.6%. That is a hard pill to swallow if you're from Charleroi, once known as Glass City, where PPG had one of its major glass factories. The people here are a casualty not just of streamlining production, but also of China's dominance in the market. Everything coming from China flooding our market is a big problem. It's a big part of the problem. It's a disease, said State Senator Camara Bartitoda, who represents the borough. The echo of the whistle lingers. The tears of the workers of their last shift remain unchecked. Everything has changed. Those who believe Americans don't want jobs in manufacturing, who do not think there's pride in what they do, should sit a spell with the people who worked here. Again, that's over at the New York Post, nypost.com. The link to this and all the stories I cover on this week's show are available out on my Gab account at BACFA. That's Bread and Circuses for America. I think the most unlikely story of the week had to be the untimely suicide, in quotes, of Virginia Giuffre. It was plowed over by other stories quite harshly, which tells me we really ought to look at it again. I noticed a lot of weirdos tilting the story towards Trump's direction. The thing is that as a young teen who had come from a broken home and had been abused, she found refuge at Mar-a-Lago as a worker there and was fished out by nefarious people and basically became a sex slave. I'll just cover this really closely. This is from some pretty available resources. There is some deep dive stuff out there as well. But this is from the Daily Mail, so fairly well read paper. Virginia Giuffre's old social media post claiming she's not suicidal sparks conspiracy theories as she becomes Jeffrey Epstein's third victim to die. There are links here. Virginia Giuffre feared enemies were out to get her. There's a link here. And, of course, they're going to point us towards suicidal resources across all the articles seem to be, if you're thinking about suicide, click here. Well, I don't think anybody is buying this load of hoo-ha. This is by Aidan Radnage, and it's one of those Infiniscroll stories, so we'll just kind of skim through here. Conspiracy theories have been surging with the sharing of a social media post by Virginia Giuffre saying she was not suicidal. The U.S. President's son, Donald Trump Jr., has been among those drawing attention to a haunting online comment by Jeffrey Epstein victim Ms. Giuffre. She died on Friday, aged 41, with a family statement saying she had killed herself at her farm home near Perth in Australia. The tragedy comes after 2 other young victims of billionaire convicted pedophile Epstein previously died. There has been a focus on a post Ms. Giuffre wrote on X, formerly Twitter, in December of 2019, in which she wrote, "I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. I've made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me in the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted." Donald Trump Jr. has now shared the post more widely, including to his 15 million followers on Elon Musk's owned X, adding the words, "This is wild." Ms. Giuffre was one of the most prominent accusers of convicted sex offenders Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who said they kept her as a sex slave while flying her around the world and offering her to their powerful associates like a platter of fruit. So, famous images here that is posted in the article, including one of supposedly Duke of York Prince Andrew, Virginia Giuffre, and the now jailed British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, who we've got pictures of her in all kinds of royal situations. She alleged that they trafficked her to the Duke of York when she was 17, Prince Andrew, and was 3 times sexually assaulted by him, a claim which was denied. The prince reached an out-of-court settlement with her in 2022. Ms. Giuffre won a multi-million-pound settlement from Prince Andrew following claims she had been forced to have sex with him 3 times at the age of 17 when she was trafficked by his friend Epstein. Andrew has denied her allegations and said he could not recall ever meeting her. A photograph has been widely shared of them together in a London townhouse, his arm around her bare midriff, and was included in Ms. Giuffre's lawsuit against him. Now, following news of Ms. Giuffre's death on Friday, President Trump ally Laura Loomer has pointed to a car crash the Epstein victim was in on March 24th as evidence of a conspiracy against her. Ms. Loomer wrote on X, "I don't believe Virginia Giuffre committed suicide, just like I don't believe Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. First, she gets in a car crash, now they say she killed herself. Sounds like someone wanted her dead." Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote on Instagram that Ms. Giuffre had died by suicide, pointedly putting the word in quote marks. The Georgia politician posted, "The truth needs to come out more in the matter of who is responsible." Another of Epstein's victims, Caroline Andriano, was found dead in a hotel room in May of 2023, having previously given testimony that put Ghislaine Maxwell in prison. The 36-year-old mother of 5 died from a suspected accidental overdose, police said at the time, though her mother, Dorothy Grainer, called for more information, saying, "Nobody's giving me any answers. This is my daughter, and she deserves justice. She got to a point where she was turning her whole life around." That came after another of Epstein's victims, Lee Patrick, died of a heroin overdose in Palm Beach in Florida in May of 2017, weeks short of turning 30. She previously told DailyMail.com in an unpublished interview in 2015 about her abuse by Epstein. Following her death, Ms. Patrick's twin, Selby, said, "My sister suffered tremendously, and it started with Epstein. Something happened in her when she met him that got her out of control. She struggled with addiction since the time she met that guy. She went to rehab several times. She fought hard, but she eventually succumbed to the addiction. We miss her." Recent concerns for Ms. Giuffre's well-being began on March 30th when she shared a photograph of herself from her hospital bed covered in bruises with her left eye nearly swollen shut. The photograph showed discoloration to her face and chest where she had described as severe bruising. She claimed she had 4 days to live and that she had kidney failure. Western Australia police publicly dismissed the severity of Giuffre's collision, describing it as a minor accident that left no one injured. She was discharged on April 7th. Her family later came out and said she had been on painkillers when she posted the Instagram and believed she was writing on a private social media page. Weeks after the crash, Ms. Giuffre then claimed in April that her husband Robert, whom she had 3 children with, was beating her. They had recently split up after 22 years of marriage. In the statement People, She said, I was able to fight back against Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, who abused and trafficked me, but I was unable to escape the domestic violence in my marriage until recently. There's a timeline here about the different stories and assaults that she documented. And the story goes on, after my husband's latest physical assault, I can no longer stay silent. Again, I thank everyone for their support. I have faith that justice will prevail. Her husband has so far not responded to the allegations. Ms. Giuffre's family confirmed her death in a statement on Friday, writing that she had lost her life to suicide after dealing with being a sex trafficking victim in her teens. They wrote, it is with utterly broken hearts that we announce that Virginia passed away last night at her farm in Western Australia. She lost her life to suicide after being a lifelong victim of sexual abuse and sex trafficking. Virginia was a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. She was the light that lifted so many survivors. In the end, the toll of abuse is so heavy that it became unbearable for Virginia to handle its weight. Her family added that the light of her life were her children Christian, Noah, and Emily. They added it was when she held her newborn daughter in her arms that Virginia realized that she had to fight back against those who had abused her and so many others. And of course, this story goes on and details lots of stuff. I'll leave this link out there for you to visit, to read, and get some of these pictures stored, because you can imagine that a lot of this stuff will just fade into the ether. I wanted to leave a couple of extra links out here this week, too. Miami Herald petitions the court to reconsider unsealing the Virginia Roberts versus Maxwell files. This is from 5 years ago on a Reddit post that talks about some of the things that were going on with the Miami Herald, who did an investigative journaling of what was going on in Florida with this guy and how he was able to manipulate and escape justice and work with authorities to somehow get a free pass. There's also this link from The Cut, where Ghislaine Maxwell is worse than Epstein. Virginia Giuffre reacts to the conviction she knows is long overdue. There's an interview here with her to give a little bit more information about what was going through her head from the New Yorker. So those links are out there for you on my Gab account. I always like to hit some stuff up about AI and what's going on in that crazy universe. So we'll wrap up the show with this story from Ars Technica. Google searches made-up AI explanations for sayings no one ever said explained. A partial defense of some of AI Overview's fanciful idiomatic explanations. This is by Kyle Orland. Last week, the phrase, "you can't lick a badger twice," unexpectedly went viral on social media. The nonsense sentence, which was likely never uttered by a human before last week, had become the poster child for the newly discovered way Google searches AI overviews makes up plausible-sounding explanations for made-up idioms, though the concept seems to predate that specific viral post by at least a few days. Google users quickly discovered that typing any concocted phrase into the search bar with the word meaning attached to the end would generate an AI overview with a purported explanation of its idiomatic meaning, even though the most nonsensical attempts at new proverbs resulted in a confident explanation from Google AI's overview created right there on the spot. In the wake of the Lick a Badger post, countless users flocked to social media to share Google AI's interpretations of their own made-up idioms, often expressing horror or disbelief at Google's take on their nonsense. Those posts often highlight the overconfident way the AI overview frames its idiomatic explanations and occasional problems with the model confabulating sources that don't exist. But after reading through dozens of publicly shared examples of Google's explanations for fake idioms and generating a few of my own, I've come away somewhat impressed with the model's almost poetic attempts to glean meaning from gibberish and make sense out of the senseless. Let's try a thought experiment. Say a child asks you what the phrase, "you can't lick a badger twice," means. You'd probably say you've never heard that particular phrase or ask the child where they heard it. You might say that you're not familiar with that phrase or that it doesn't really make sense without more context. There's a a link here of some people talking about this. But let's say the child persisted and really wanted an explanation for what the phrase means. So you'd do your best to generate a plausible sounding answer. You'd search your memory for possible connotations for the word lick and or symbolic meaning for the noble badger to force the idiom into some semblance of sense. You'd reach back to other similar idioms, to try to fit this new unfamiliar phrase into a wider pattern. Anyone who's played the excellent board game Wise and Otherwise might be familiar with the process. Google AI's overview doesn't go through that exact kind of human thought process when faced with a similar question about the same saying, but in its own way, the large language model also does its best to generate a plausible-sounding response to an unreasonable request. As seen in Greg Jenner's viral Blue Sky post, Google AI's overview suggests that you can't lick a badger twice means that you can't trick or deceive someone a second time after they've been tricked once. It's a warning that if someone has already been deceived, they are unlikely to fall for the same trick again. As an attempt to derive meaning from meaningless phrase, which was, after all, the user's request, that's not half bad. Faced with a phrase that has no inherent meaning, the AI overview still makes a good faith effort to answer the user's request and draw some plausible explanation out of troll-worthy nonsense. Contrary to the computer science truism of garbage in, garbage out, Google here is taking in some garbage and spitting out, a workable interpretation of garbage at the very least. Google AI's overview even goes into more detail explaining its thought process. Lick here means to trick or deceive someone. It says a bit of a stretch from the dictionary definition of lick is comprehensively defeat, but probably close enough for an idiom and a plausible iteration of the idiom. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Google also explains that the badger part of the phrase likely originates from the historical sport of badger baiting, a practice I was sure Google was hallucinating until I looked it up and found it was real. I found plenty of other examples where Google AI's derived more meaning than the original requester's gibberish probably deserved. Google interprets the phrase, dream makes the steam, as an almost poetic statement about imagination powering innovation. The line, you can't humble a tortoise, similarly gets interpreted as a statement about the difficulty of intimidating someone with a strong, steady, unwavering character like a tortoise. Google also finds connections that the original nonsense idiom creators likely didn't intend. For instance, Google could link the made-up idiom, a deaf cat always rings the bell, to the real concept of belling the cat. And in an attempt to interpret the nonsense phrase, two cats are better than grapes, the AI overview correctly notes that grapes can be potentially toxic to cats. Even with Google AI's overview working hard to make the best of a bad prompt, I can still understand why the responses rub a lot of users the wrong way. A lot of the problem, I think, has to do with the large language model's unearned confident tone, which pretends that any made-up idiom is a common saying with a well-established and authoritative meaning. Rather than framing its responses as a best guess at an unknown phrase, as a human might when responding to a child in the example above, Google generally provides the user with a single authoritative explanation for what an idiom means, full stop, even with the occasional use of couching words, such as likely, probably, or suggests. The AI overview comes off as unnervingly sure of the accepted meaning for some nonsense the user made up 5 seconds ago. I was able to find one exception to this in my testing when I asked Google the meaning of when you see a tortoise spin in a circle. Google reasonably told me that the phrase doesn't have a widely recognized specific meaning and that it's not a standard expression with a clear universal meaning. With that context, Google then offered suggestions for what the phrase seems to mean and mentioned Japanese nursery rhymes that it may be connected to, before concluding that it's open to interpretation. Those qualifiers go a long way toward properly contextualizing the guesswork Google AI's overview is actually conducting here, and if Google provided that kind of context in every AI summary explanation of made-up phrase, I don't think users would be quite as upset. Unfortunately, large language models like this have trouble knowing what they don't know, meaning moments of self-doubt like the turtle interpretation here tend to be few and far between. It's not like Google's language model has some master list of idioms in its neural network that it can consult to determine what is and isn't a standard expression that it can be confident about. Usually it's just projecting a self-assured tone while struggling to force the user's gibberish into meaning. The worst examples of Google's idiomatic AI guesswork are ones where the model slips past plausible interpretations and into sheer hallucination of completely fictional sources. The phrase, "a dog never dances before sunset," for instance, did not appear in the film Before Sunrise, no matter what Google says. Similarly, "There are always two suns on Tuesday" does not appear in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy film, despite Google's insistence that it does. There's also no indication that the made-up phrase, "Welshmen jump the rabbit," originated on the Welsh island of Portland, or that peanut butter platform heels refers to a scientific experiment creating diamonds from the sticky snack. We're also unaware of any Greek myth where Zeus disguises himself as a golden shower to explain the phrase, "Beware what glitters in a golden shower." Update, as many commenters have pointed out, this last one is actually a reference to the Greek myth of Danae and the shower of gold, showing Google's AI knows more about this potential symbolism than I do. The fact that Google's AI overview presents these completely made-up sources with the same self-assurance as its abstract interpretations is a big part of the problem here. It's also a persistent problem for large language models that tend to make up news sources and cite fake legal cases regularly. As usual, one should be very wary when trusting anything a large language model presents as objective fact. When it comes to the more artistic and symbolic interpretation of nonsense phrases, though, I think Google's AI overviews have gotten something of a bad rap recently. Presented with the difficult task of explaining nigh unexplainable phrases, the model does its best, generating interpretations that can border on the profound at times, while the authoritative tone of those responses can sometimes be annoying or actively misleading. It's at least amusing to see the model's best attempts to deal with our meaningless phrases. Again, that's by Kyle Orland over at arstechnica.com. I think that this is the right approach. Playing around with it, not taking it seriously, and sticking them a little bit for saying, look, you need to put some asterisk around this thing, or it needs to always be in purple text when it's not really sure, or things that are generated from whole cloth that needs to be in purple text, or there needs to be an HTML tag that says this is made up junk from AI. And here's where it came from, and on what date, and which engine did it. That's your source. I want to wish you all a wonderful week. Somewhere between peaches and beaches, you'll find me. I'm BACFA. We'll see you again same time next week for another episode of Atomic Biscuits. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, DLive and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.